Okay. Welcome to DCTP.tv from the campus party in Berlin 2012 at the former airport in Berlin Tempelhof. My next guest is Pat Walshe from the GSMA. Welcome, Pat,
Thank you.
to the program. So GSMA, you have to first explain who you represent.
Okay, it stands for the GSM Association, and we represent the interests of 800 mobile phone operators around the world.
And you are here to present a framework for privacy of apps.
Well, we're here because I think that many of the 10,000 people here today are those developing apps of tomorrow. They're the young people. We need to understand what their views are, and because we believe there's a need to create a framework that gives people consistent privacy experiences in this app environment. Yeah.
Okay. First, explain the problem. What is the problem with apps and privacy? So apps on smartphones, Google, Apple, and some other systems.
I think the situation today is that we have privacy, if you're in Europe, is regulated by 27 different sets of laws and rules. If we look at privacy globally, it's regulated by a patchwork of geographically bound laws, but apps and the services that are associated with them are global in nature. And what we find is that there's no consistent approach within the industry or at a policy level as to how to deal with privacy.
So what happens? I download an app, say from the Apple App Store on my iPhone. So what's the concern?
I think one of the challenges here is that when you download that app could involve maybe 4 or 5 or 6 different entities, each sharing your information for different purposes.
Like
well, for example, it might be that that Apple would share some of that information. It could be that the app developer would share some of that information. It could be that a analytics company shares some of that information. It could be that the advertiser gets access and shares that information in order to deliver advertising to you. So what does that mean for you? Does that mean that you should have 5 different sets of notices to tell you about all this? 5 different prompts to express your preference and your choice in relation to how that data is used? I think that's one of the challenges we face.
So we had this instances like an app downloaded the whole address book. There were apps that were downloading whole address books or copying all the photos without user's consent, without even the user knowing that they were copying these address books. Are these the concerns you have, or are there other concerns?
No, they are some of the concerns that we have, and that, for example, happened 3 years ago. It wasn't just the recent incident, it happened 3 years ago. And these guidelines that we've developed as an association, so we've developed these privacy design guidelines for mobile application development, which we shared with many ecosystem players a while ago and sought their advice and their input. It deals with issues like that. Had those companies implemented these guidelines, then you wouldn't have had those press headlines at all.
And what are the main guidelines?
The main guidelines are about transparency, notice and choice. So be honest and open with people about what your app's doing. Give them choice and preferences about how their data is used. We had that discussion this morning on the privacy panel. And is it wrong for an app developer to want to use data? No, it's not wrong for an app developer to want to use data. Many of the apps that are provided are free, and they're free because they're funded by advertising. But what's wrong with telling the user that it's funded by advertising? What's wrong with telling the user the information the app will use? What's wrong with telling the user who the information will shared with? And what's wrong with giving them choice and information to help an informed decision about whether they want to use that app?
The problem is that if I'm asked every 5 seconds whether I want to share this information or whether I'd like to give my consent for publishing this information, there will be pop-ups all the time, and in the end the user will always click okay, 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 don't bother me, okay, okay, okay.
Absolutely. I think that's one thing that we're discussing with European regulators at the moment under the proposed rules, that if you have excessive notice requirements, actually it's bad for privacy, because as you say, people just say yes, yes, yes to get rid of it. So what we're trying to say is, can the industry come together in dialogue and agree basic standards, and who would be responsible for providing a notice in context? Because I think increasingly context is important. People can't make a decision, I think, by being presented with a 22,000 word privacy policy.
But what is the solution then?
My solution is just in time notice. So For example, if I'm going to use something that needs to use my location, it should be asking me, do I want, is it okay to use my location?
Every time?
No, not every time. I want to be able to set preferences. I want to be able to say, remind me every 5 times. Or, yes, ask my permission every time. So I think industry, I think innovation in this area, in giving people real choice according to their interests, is going to be the winner. I think the company that provides sophistication and flexibility in expressing choice are the ones that will win, to be honest.
Very, very important players in this settings are the app stores of Google and Apple, because they, at least Apple, they have their guidelines too. And if they say, well, you have to ask the user whether he wants to share his contacts, or whether he wants to share his location, or whether he wants to share his photo library, every app in the App Store has to do it. Are you in contact with the Apple App Store to talk about this?
We have shared these proposals, these guidelines, with many of those players in the ecosystem. In fact, we've been invited by the California Attorney General's office in the US, has initiated a program to implement best practice in this area. The NTIA, in the US, so the US government, for example, have brought together multiple stakeholders to enter into dialogue on developing a code of conduct for app privacy, and we're part of that dialogue, trying to bring people together and foster, I suppose, agreement on this area. What is the appropriate and effective privacy standard that should apply? I think because what's important to all of us is that the user of a mobile device is a customer of all of us in this ecosystem, and I think it's really important to be able to foster trust and confidence in all of us, because if they don't have trust and confidence in us, then I think we,
And the EU is working on a privacy, on a new privacy regulation, where many things are in that proposed regulation, but one important part is that the user has to be asked, that he has to give his consent. Does this fits into your proposal, or is it a contradiction?
I think in the new European proposals, I think from my perspective, there's an over-reliance on consent, and there's an over-reliance on providing information. I think, and that legal obligation is also linked to fines, and I think by linking it to fines also, that there's a danger that companies may give people more information, not less. I think we have to find a way to give people information in context, because often it's the context that determines whether I am concerned about my privacy or not. So the trick here is, how can we make people aware that that particular context has implications for them, and very simple, easy ways to express their preference and their choice. It's not easy, but it can be done.
But do you think it will work without fines? I mean, what app developer voluntarily implements these kind of mechanisms if there's no fine, or if there is no regulation within the app stores?
I think we need. I don't think the law could ever really keep up with technology, first of all, and I think that's where self-regulation plays a very vital role, and that's why I'm pleased to see in the European regulation a focus on self-regulation, a focus on codes of conduct, and a focus also on privacy certification. And I think if we can combine all of those, I think users will be able to determine which apps are the apps they should be using, and which apps perhaps pose implications for their privacy.
The last question is, you represent most of the mobile phone operators in the world, and usually our calls are encrypted. And in Germany there have been several conferences, and it's shown several times that German mobile phone operators implement, or most of them have implemented, an old encryption, which makes it possible for nearly everyone to wiretap phones, to read SMS. It's pretty easy, I've seen it myself. The problem is the GSMA is recommending a new standard, A53, but it is not implemented by most of the German mobile phone operators. Why is the GSMA not enforcing this new and more or less secure encryption for mobile phones?
Well, I'm not aware of the particular instances that you're referring to, and I think there is an expectation that members would implement the latest standards in that regard, but I'm not aware of the particular instances.
But why can't you enforce it?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of the GSMA enforcing it. I think there's an expectation that members will implement it, and I think that's a question that is one that's for the operators here in Germany to be asked directly.
But you're aware of the problem that they are not implementing the latest standards?
Well, I'm not aware of that particular case that you're referring to, so I can't really comment on that because I'm not aware of it.
But you would recommend that the latest encryption standards are implemented?
I think that, you know, when we talk about privacy, it's always about identifying and understanding risks and taking appropriate measures to mitigate those risks. And if adopting the latest standard is appropriate to mitigate those risks, then that's what should be done.
Okay, thank you very much, Volker.
You're welcome, thank you.
Okay.